Today, as you listen to Carrie review her family history in Orange, Texas, I want to reflect on how you all could go home today and think about the fact that you might be inspired to write your own family history. Probably not one like Carrie's that can be read by anyone on the planet. You can order it on Amazon.com, but you could go home and write a history of your family for your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. And if you leave this luncheon today with one idea that you might have to write that story, then this luncheon is a success. So now I want to introduce to you the very inspirational Carrie Woliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. That was an incredible introduction. I loved it. Before I start, I would like very much to thank all of you for coming. I just, when she said, let's do this, and I was saying, who wants to come hear me talk about this book? But anyway, I'm so pleased. We even have some people from Orange who I'm sure are enjoying all of the orange touches that Sandra did. And I have a dear friend that came this morning from Orange, and so it's very exciting for me, and I feel very honored to be here. My book has been out now since the 1st of November, and I've already had 2 book signings in Orange, which was sort of fun. And the first one was held at a little cafe there in Orange, and you all, the people were out the door. So I was very, very pleased with that turnout. So anyway, let's go ahead and I'll tell you about the book. As a child, the long wail of the train always brought warm feelings for me. And my grandparents had a house right near the railroad track, just 2 houses from the railroad track. So the trains went by a lot in those days. And whenever I'd spend the night there, which was often as a youngster, then I always got warm feelings when that rumble of the train came through there, because it was just part of living there in Orange next to my grandmother. And I'm sure that you all sometime in the middle of the night somewhere will hear a train, and I don't know why, but I felt really safe. Now, my book, The Train Stopped in Orange, is set in that southeast Texas town of Orange. And I found my grandparents' diaries from 1917 and 18 when my mother died here in Houston. And I picked up, it was just a sack, it was just a plastic sack, and I opened it up, and there were these precious 4 diaries. And I went home and I started reading them, and I thought, wow, this is a treasure of history that I have to do something about. And so I wrote this book. Orange in 1917 was a bustling little community. Their major industry at that time was lumber. And Orange is located right on the Louisiana border. And what divides it is the Sabine River. Well, back in 1917, you had to ferry across to get there. And on the other end of Orange, about 25 miles to the west, it was the largest town nearby, and that was Beaumont. And Beaumont was separated by the Neches River. So you had to go across the ferry to get to Beaumont from Orange. So it's very different now. We just fly by on I-10 and take advantage. We just take all our bridges for granted. In those days, it wasn't unusual to find gardens in the backs of the houses in Orange. And you'd see them squash, mustard greens, turnip greens. chickens pecking around the yard, and over in the corner a fig tree. Now think about it. How fortunate we are to be able to go down to the corner grocery store and just bring home our already cooked chicken. I mean, we really are fortunate to be able to do that. In the 1917 diary of my grandfather, he wrote a lot about his experiences fishing. And I'm not telling you that he fished once a week. The man fished all the time. He would go down to his boat, or he went on somebody else's boat, and he'd get his cronies together and some of his relatives and go fishing. And I was thinking as I was reading this, what is this all the man did? The truth of the matter is, he was bringing food home for the table. They didn't have grocery stores, so he never in the diaries of my grandmother did I see her griping about her husband going fishing again. No, he actually brought home the bread for his family. Now, one thing he did was at the beginning of every excerpt in the diary, he gave you the weather. Now, okay, this was something that every fisherman likes to do. So I'm going to read you an example of that. Unfortunately, I can't see. Okay, so this was Sunday, June the 3rd, 1917. Cloudy, strong south wind, and very warm. Got up at 4 a.m., and after feasting on frog legs, bacon, eggs, and coffee, Dr. Smith and I went in the car to Mr. Willifred's about 11 miles south of Kuntz. I didn't have very much luck during forenoon, but Dr. Story got 11 beauties. We ate dinner at noon, and Dr. Story gave me 2 bugs to use, and during the afternoon I got 5 bass, and Doctor got 2, and McInnes caught 2 all day. We returned to the clubhouse about 4:30 p.m. and had a fine fish supper, and we all ate as much as we could hold. We came home about 10:30 p.m. Now, I mean, the man fished a lot. Okay. The Joiners rode around town in a horse and buggy until sometime in 1917. My grandfather caught fever. Not typhoid fever, car fever. And the next day, he went out and got his Overland car, his first car, and he paid $875 for it. Of his hard-earned dough, he says. I'm sure it was. Now, I want you all to visualize your grandmothers, and I'm sure yours are very much like mine. Warm, loving, and nurturing. And now, every morning, even in the 50s, my grandmother, Nanu, would pull on her teddies, which was sort of like a slip. She would put on her corset and then her dress. Well, as I was writing this, I thought, what's the history of this corset thing? I mean, why would anybody want to wear that? So I happen to have another reading here. The history of the corset is fascinating. The famous Queen Catherine de' Medici, the wife of King Henry II of France, enforced a ban on thick waists at court. In 1550, starting over 350 years of whalebones, steel rods, and midriff torture. By the in America they became popular in the late 19th century. And by the 1940s, though, most of the ladies were wearing brassieres, which was invented in 1913 by a New York socialite, Mary Phelps Jacob. Now, Mary designed the whalebones that were used to stiffen corsets. No, I don't mean designed them. She despised them. And she proceeded to design her brassiere, which is French for upper arms, if you didn't know. Now, this is what she did. She took 2 silk handkerchiefs and then some pink ribbon. And that was the first brassiere. Her brassieres became extremely popular to the point where she sold her business, Backless Brassiere Production, to Warner Brothers Corset Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut for $1,500. Now, that was Warner, the lingerie manufacturer, not Warner, the movie makers. But actually, in World War I, which was 1917 and 18, World War I dealt the corset a fatal blow when the U.S. War Industries Board called on women to stop buying corsets in 1917. It freed up some 28,000 tons of metal for the war effort. Oh, gosh. My grandmother also did a lot of sewing. Dresses for the baby, Mamie Anna, my cousin Suzanne's mother, and my father, J.D., she made silk shirts. And then when her 3 brothers went off to war, she and her other relatives would sew socks and scarves and things to keep the soldiers warm. In fact, I have a whole chapter called The Cottles at War. My grandmother was a cottle. And that'll tell you how grim that war really was. Suzanne, my cousin here, this is Suzanne over here. Wave your hand. She'll remember when Nanu, our grandmother, was frightened. One night, we were spending the night over there, and my grandmother found a mouse in the closet. And she said, "Quick, get me a broom." And so we got her a broom, and she went wailing away, that poor mouse, and Suzanne and I did nothing but laugh. Now, since we had so much fun growing up together in Orange, I have a whole chapter called Playing with Suzanne, which you will enjoy. And one of our favorite things was playing paper dolls. So that's why we did that. We also did one other thing in regards to the train. Suzanne actually lived right across the street from my grandmother. And her house was actually next to the train tracks. And so she reminded me that there was a table over there, and when the train came by, she and I would get on top of the table and we would perform for the people on the train. And believe me, I remember they waved. They loved it. For entertainment, the diaries reveal that my grandparents went to one of 2 theaters weekly. They didn't have any television, so they went to the theater and they saw silent movies, and they also had visiting acts, like he talks about Fatty Arbuckle, a comedian, came to Orange. And then I have a picture in the book of a man who scaled the downtown buildings. He called himself the human fly. Daddy, a banker by trade, was very active in his lodge, and he was a member of the International Order of the Odd Fellows. Well, I researched the origin of this group because I thought it was kind of odd. And the men were called the Odd Fellows and the women were the Rebeccas. And I found out that the organization actually was formed in 18th century England. And they pursued projects for the benefit of mankind. And such actions during that time were considered odd. For added fun, I have written my memories of growing up in Orange in the 50s near my grandparents. So those of you out there who were around in the 50s, you will love this because it will bring back all your warm, fuzzy memories of growing up. Because I'm sure it's very similar to my childhood, but you remember that was the time of Elvis, and that was the time of poodle skirts, and pink and black, turned up collars, and petticoats. Loads of petticoats. In fact, I had a friend who wore so many petticoats that she had to wear a cinch belt to keep them up. Do you remember that? That was Patsy. Yeah, right. Okay. I have another excerpt from the 50s. The 10 Commandments governed our small town and our lives in the 50s. And we were taught to know the difference between right and wrong and to take responsibility for our actions. Serving your country was a privilege, but living in America was an even bigger privilege. The terms making out referred to how you did on your school exam. Grass was mowed, and Coke was a cold drink, and pot was something your mother cooked in. We had 5 and 10 cent stores where you could actually buy things for 5 and 10 cents. And hardware was found in a hardware store, and software wasn't even a word. I also read, for my friend Diana Hill here is from Orange. Birthday parties were just as popular then as now, especially with the girls. One of my favorites was the slumber party. In high school, Mother allowed me to have one at the community park building with no chaperones. There were 1 or 2 girlfriends who would sneak in a pack or 2 of cigarettes for all of us to try. Luckily, I always thought they tasted like burned paper, so I never got hooked. I would much rather make up plays. So late at night, my friend Diana and I would act out our own version of a soap opera, always pulling some tears from the few sleepyheads who stayed up for the play. Now, the last part of the 50s, it seems, thinking back, like a tranquil, innocent period. But below the surface, the 50s were hot. When Chubby Checker introduced the twist, American kids went crazy, gyrating their bodies, but soon the whole world was doing it. Okay. I did run across a mystery when I was doing my research. My mother was a Spencer, and she was born in Jennings, Louisiana. Her father, Stanley, my grandfather, got together with 4 other businessmen there in Jennings, and they drilled the very first oil well in Jennings, Louisiana. Exciting, huh? Well, it did strike. They had oil, but only for a short period of time, because back then they didn't know what to do with the sands that would just come tumbling in to stop the oil. Then the mystery came around. The mystery was, why did he up and move his family to Beaumont, Texas? I asked my only living relative, my aunt, who died last summer. I said, do you know why he moved the family from Jennings to Beaumont? No, she didn't. Well, I think it's because he wanted to come and build another well there in the Spindletop field there in Beaumont. But what he did was he formed an ice company called the Crystal Ice Company. And you remember, back then there were no refrigerators. There were just ice boxes. So the guy who brought the ice actually had a very good living. So that's what he did. Well, I hope you enjoy your copy of my book. I think you'll enjoy it. And keep it by the bed, because I think it'll promote some pleasant dreams. Thank you.